first time he heard the words, they came out of her like a confession she'd been holding between her teeth for years. "They'll kill me if I stay." Elias Ward looked up from the saddle he'd been mending, the leather strip hanging limp in his hand. The woman on his porch didn't belong to these mountains. Not with that thin calico dress torn at the hem, not with those city shoes sunk deep in the mud, not with those bruises half hidden by the fading light. She stood just past the threshold of his cabin, as if an invisible line held her there. Behind her, the last smear of evening painted the sky in bruised purples and dying gold. In front of her, the interior of his cabin glowed with lamplight and the orange heartbeat of the fire. Her hands shook. She dug her fingers into the wooden doorframe to keep from crumpling. He set the saddle aside, slow and deliberate, as if he were calming a spooked horse. "Then you're leaving with me," he said. The words came out low, steady, without drama, but they landed in the room like a rifle shot. For a second, she just stared at him, eyes wide and dark, the way animals look right before they bolt or collapse. Her hair was coming loose from its pins, strands stuck to her cheek where a fresh bruise bloomed yellow and purple. Mud streaked the bottom of her dress. There was blood on one sleeve. He couldn't tell if it was old or new. "You don't even know my name," she whispered. "I know enough." Elias rose to his full height, the floorboards creaking under his weight. "I know someone put that mark on your face." His gaze flicked over the fading fingerprints on her jaw, the split in her lip. "I know you walked 5 miles of bad road to get to a cabin nobody visits unless they're desperate. And I know you're not lying about the kill you part, or you wouldn't be shaking that hard." She swallowed, her throat working like it hurt. The urge to step inside, to collapse near the fire, warred on her face with the instinct to stay ready to run. "Who sent you?" he asked. "No one sent me," she said quickly. They'd skin me alive if they knew I was here." Her voice broke on the last word, then steadied. "I heard your name in town. The way they said it." "And how's that?" Elias asked. "Like you're a ghost they can't quite prove exists," she said. "Like you're the one man they don't want to owe anything to, but they always do, in the end." His jaw tightened. Folks in Dawson Ridge had never been good at minding their tongues. "What's your name?" he asked again, softer. "Clara," she said after a beat. "Clara Haynes." "Mrs. Haynes?" he asked, though he already suspected the answer. Her mouth twisted. "Not for much longer, if my husband has his way." Elias felt something cold settle in his gut. He had seen men like that before. The kind who wore their name like a badge and their temper like a second skin. He'd buried more than one woman who'd believed there was nowhere left to run. "How far behind you is he?" Elias asked. Clara blinked. "What?" "That man," he said. "The one you married. The one you're running from. How far behind?" I don't know," she admitted. "He was at the saloon when I left. Drunk. Angry. Everyone saw the way he grabbed me." Her eyes dropped to her wrist. Faint red rings showed where fingers had dug in. "I waited until they were all busy shouting about cattle prices and poker hands, then slipped out the back. Took the creek route up. No lantern. I fell twice." She said it like facts on a ledger, but her hands kept betraying her, fingers flexing, nails digging into her palms. Elias listened, weighing each detail. Creek route meant she'd stayed low, under the line of the ridge. No lantern meant no light, but it also meant no beacon for the man to follow. Still, when a man like that realized his property, because that was how he thought of her, Elias was sure, had slipped its leash, he wouldn't sit quiet. "How many horses he got?" Elias asked. 3 at the ranch," she said automatically. 2 sound enough to ride hard. 1 is half lame. He'd take the black mare. She's fast. Mean, too. He likes that about her. The way she spoke about the horses told him something else. Clara Haynes paid attention. She noticed which horse favored which leg, which one could handle a hard run. That kind of mind was worth listening to. "You got anything besides what's in that bag?" he asked, nodding at the small satchel she clutched against her chest like it was her last line of defense. She shook her head. "I left my trunk. Wasn't worth my life." "Your life is worth more than any trunk," Elias said. "More than any house he owns, too." She looked up at that, as if those were words she hadn't heard before. Not from a man, at least. "You don't know what you're saying, Mr. Ward," she whispered. "If he finds me here, he'll come for you, too. He'll come for anyone who helps me. Sheriff's his friend. Judge plays cards in his back parlor every Friday night. Men like him don't have to shoot you themselves. They just have to say the right thing to the right people." Elias stepped closer. Not enough to crowd her, but enough that the firelight caught the scars along his knuckles, the faint line across his cheek that told its own story. "Clara," he said, testing the name on his tongue, anchoring it. "I've had men like him come for me before. Some walked away. Some didn't. But none of them ever scared me enough to let a woman crawl back to a life that'll kill her slow." Her eyes filled suddenly, the tears rising faster than she could fight them. She clenched her jaw, nostrils flaring, as if she could hold them in by sheer will. "I don't want to die out here," she said. "But I can't go back. Not after tonight. Not after the way he—" Her voice refused to carry that memory, dropping into silence. Elias didn't ask for details. Sometimes, the not-said parts told him more than the words ever could. "Then it's settled," he said. "Nothing's settled," she snapped, the flash of sharpness surprising both of them. "You haven't thought this through. You don't even know what he's capable of." Elias let the edge in her tone roll past him. "I know he's capable of making you show up on my porch with your face marked and your hands shaking. That's all I need to know." "You'll regret this," she said, though there was no conviction in it. "Just habit. Just the echo of someone else's threats." He shook his head once. "I don't regret much," he said. "Just a few times I didn't act when I should have. I'm not adding tonight to that list." A gust of wind hit the cabin then, making the lamplight flicker and the doorframe shudder around her. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, long and thin, like a warning stretched across the dark. "How long until he sobers enough to notice you're gone?" Elias asked. She thought about it, wiping her face with the back of her sleeve almost angrily. "An hour," she said. "Maybe less. Once he realizes I'm not in the kitchen, he'll check the barn. Then the yard. Then he'll start asking questions at the saloon. And how far is his place from town at a hard ride?" Elias asked. "Half an hour there, half an hour back," she said automatically. "Less if he pushes the mare." "So he could be on your trail in under an hour," Elias said. "And up this way in another 40 minutes if he guesses right." "If," she echoed, flicking a glance toward the window, where the last shred of daylight was bleeding away. "I didn't say he's smart," Elias said. "Just mean. Mean and smart don't always come in the same package." For the first time, the corner of her mouth twitched, like some long-buried part of her remembered how to smile. It slipped away almost as soon as it appeared. "What will you do?" Clara asked. "If he comes here." Elias wiped his hands on a rag, then reached for his coat hanging on the peg by the door. "First thing I'm gonna do," he said, "is get you away from this porch. If he's any kind of tracker at all, he'll see your prints running straight to my door from the road." "There was snow," she said. "Not much, but enough to show tracks." "Exactly," Elias replied. "So you and me, we're not here when he decides to play sheriff on my front step." Her fingers tightened on the satchel strap. "Where would we go? He knows this town, this valley. He's been riding it his whole life." Elias slid his arms into his coat, the movement practiced and easy. "He knows the roads," he said. "I know the places that aren't on any map." He crossed to the corner where his rifle leaned, checked the chamber with a quick, practiced motion, then slung it across his back. The routine steadied him, like tightening cinches before a hard climb. "Clara," he said, meeting her eyes full on now, "you can walk back down that trail. Back to the house where he's waiting to break you down piece by piece until there's nothing left of you but apologies and bruises. Or you can walk out that side door, follow me into the dark, and trust that whatever waits in those trees is still better than what you're running from." The choice lay between them like a loaded gun on a table. For a long, breathless moment, the only sounds were the pop of the fire and the low moan of the wind under the eaves. Then Clara Haynes drew in a shaky breath, loosened her death grip on the front doorframe, and took one step toward him. And another. She moved like every part of her body hurt. But she moved. "Where does that door lead?" she asked, nodding toward the narrow side entrance most folks never noticed. "Into the kind of trouble you don't come back from the same," Elias said honestly. "But you come back alive." Her mouth trembled, but her chin lifted. "Then I'm leaving with you," she said. "Good," Elias replied, reaching for the lamp and turning the flame low enough that the cabin fell into a softer, shadowed glow. Outside, the night gathered itself, thick and waiting. Somewhere down in the valley, a horse whinnied sharply, as if sensing the first tremor of the storm that was about to break over Dawson Ridge. "Because whether your husband knows it yet or not," Elias added quietly, "he started a war when he laid hands on you. And I don't lose wars in my own mountains." The forest swallowed them the moment they slipped through the side door. Clara kept close behind Elias, her breath making small white clouds in the freezing air. Her thin dress wasn't made for mountain nights, and every step sent a shiver ripping through her body, but she didn't slow down. Fear pushed her forward, sharp as a spur digging into flesh. Elias moved like he'd been carved out of these woods, silent and certain. His boots found the solid patches of earth between snow pockets, his hand steady on the rifle slung across his back. He didn't look behind him often, but every time he did, Clara felt the same quiet reassurance. "You're not alone anymore." They crossed the tree line, and the world changed. Wind hissed through the pines like whispered warnings. Branches groaned overhead. Somewhere far off, a creek gurgled beneath a thin layer of ice. "Stay close," Elias murmured without breaking stride. "This ridge is safe. The trees hide our scent and block sound." "Safe from him?" she asked, struggling to keep her voice steady. Elias didn't answer immediately. Instead, he paused, crouched low, and examined a patch of disturbed snow where deer tracks overlapped with faint human boot prints. He brushed his thumb across the half-melted imprint and exhaled slowly. "Not from him," he said. "From everything else the mountains hold. But your husband? He's more predictable than he thinks." Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. "You think he'll ride after me tonight?" Elias rose, scanning the dark horizon beyond the trees. "I think the moment he sobers enough to realize you're gone, he'll tear half the valley apart. Men like him don't look for their wives, they look for their property." A gust of cold wind carried a distant sound, hooves pounding hard against frozen ground. Not close, but not far enough. Clara froze. "Is that?" Elias tilted his head slightly, listening. Then he took her hand, his grip firm and warm even through the cold. "His riding," Elias said, "and his riding angry." Her breath hitched. "What do we do?" Elias looked at her then, really looked, and his voice turned to iron. "We make sure he never reaches you." Clara stumbled once on a hidden root, her knee buckling, but Elias caught her before she hit the frozen earth. His hands were steady, warm, grounding, so different from the man she'd fled, whose touch always came with consequences. "You hurt?" he asked. "Only tired," she whispered, though the burning in her lungs said otherwise. Elias didn't call her on the lie. He simply shifted her satchel over his own shoulder and guided her deeper into the forest, his pace slowing just enough for her to keep up without falling again. But the quiet didn't last. A gunshot cracked in the distance, sharp, vicious, unmistakable. Clara flinched so hard she nearly dropped. His shooting. No, Elias said, voice low. That wasn't for us. That was him warning the town he's looking. He paused, listening hard. He wants fear to drive people to talk. And someone will. Folks mean well, but they talk when a man like him starts cracking knuckles. Her stomach twisted. So he'll know which way I went. He already does, Elias murmured. Tracks don't lie. He angled them toward a steep rise covered in old pine. The ground here was harder, the snow patchy enough that tracking would be slower. But Clara's legs trembled under the incline. Elias, I don't know if I can climb that. You can, he said. And you will. I've seen folks run out of breath, out of strength, even out of hope. But nobody runs out of will until they quit. And you ain't quitting tonight. She didn't know where he found that certainty, but she leaned on it, drawing from it like a well. Halfway up, a cold wind gusted through the trees, carrying something with it. The faint metallic jingle of a bridle and the unmistakable crunch of hooves on icy ground. Clara grabbed Elias's arm. His closer. Elias's jaw tightened. He pushed the mare too hard. She's foaming. Means he's desperate. Clara's voice trembled. What does that mean for us? It means, Elias said, turning toward a narrow game trail curving along the ridge. We start using the mountains the way they were meant to be used. To hide what deserves a chance to live. The game trail Elias chose wasn't really a trail at all. Just a narrow strip of frozen earth carved between jagged rocks. One wrong step meant tumbling 20 feet into a ravine lined with boulders. Clara's breath hitched when she saw the drop, but Elias placed his hand on her back, steady and sure. Eyes on me, he murmured. Not the fall. She obeyed. His broad shoulders filled her view, moving with the silence and precision of a man who belonged to the wilderness. Every step he took was deliberate, balanced, as if he'd walked this ridge 1,000 times. Behind them, the sound of hooves grew sharper, faster, more erratic. The black mare was being ridden past her limits. Clara's heartbeat stuttered. His gaining. Not for long, Elias said. This trail wasn't made for horses. They reached a point where the ridge narrowed to little more than a stone spine. Clara pressed herself against the icy rock wall, her fingers raw, her breath fogging the air. Elias climbed ahead a few feet, then turned back and extended his hand. Take it. Her pulse roared in her ears. I'm not sure I can. You walked 5 miles through the cold with nothing but fear behind you, he said softly. You can do this. Something in his voice, steady as bedrock, pushed back her panic. She reached out, her hand shaking, and he gripped her firmly, guiding her across the narrowest point. They had almost made it to safer ground when a violent crack echoed through the ridge, stone splintering from a thrown horseshoe striking the rock edge. Clara gasped and looked back. Her husband had reached the mouth of the ridge. He couldn't bring the mare farther, but he didn't need to. He'd dismounted, and he was on foot now, moving fast, fury fueling each step. Clara's blood ran cold. Elias, he's coming. Elias pulled her close enough that she could hear the low growl beneath his breath. Let him come, he said. These mountains don't belong to him. And neither do you. Clara had imagined this moment 100 times. Her husband finding her, dragging her back by the wrist like he had so many times before. But nothing in her nightmares matched the sight of him now. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't stumbling drunk. He wasn't wild-eyed with rage. He was worse. He was calm. That terrible, focused calm she had only seen twice in her life. Once right before he broke her ribs, and once when he beat a ranch hand over a misplaced ledger. It was the calm of a man who believed the world belonged to him, and anything that dared run was simply prey delaying the inevitable. Elias sensed it too. He shifted his body slightly, just enough to put himself between Clara and the man climbing the ridge below them. His shoulders squared, his stance widening on the narrow stone, claiming the space without needing to raise his voice. "Keep moving up the trail," he murmured to Clara without looking back. "No," she whispered. "He'll kill you." "Not in my mountains," Elias said. Her husband's voice rose from below, steady as iron. "Clara, I know you can hear me." Clara flinched, her grip tightening on Elias's coat. "You think he cares about you?" the man called, climbing faster now. "He just wants to play hero. They always do. But they don't stay. They don't keep you fed. They don't keep you alive." Elias let out a low, humorless breath. "Man talks like he's describing a horse he lost in a storm." Clara's husband continued, each word slicing through the cold air. "Come down now, Clara. Don't make me drag you. You know how that ends." Clara's heart lurched painfully. A memory flashed, his hand around her throat, his voice whispering apologies after the bruises had already formed. "Don't listen," Elias murmured. "He only has the power you give him." Her husband reached the ridge's midpoint, now less than 20 yards away. And then, he stopped. Not because he was winded, not because he was afraid, but because he finally saw Elias clearly in the fading light. "You," he said, recognition twisting his face. "You're the mountain bastard they whisper about." Elias didn't flinch. "And you're the coward who lays hands on women." Clara's husband's smile sharpened. "You're going to die for getting in my way." Elias stepped forward just enough that his shadow fell long across the ridge. "You'll have to climb over me to touch her," he said calmly. "And you won't." For the first time since Clara fled her home, she felt hope like a spark under her ribs. Because her husband didn't realize something vital. Elias Ward wasn't bluffing. And the mountains were on his side. The ridge grew darker as clouds swallowed the moon, turning the world into a strip of cold grey stone bordered by emptiness on one side and a wall of jagged pines on the other. Clara's breath came shallow and fast, fogging the air as she clung to a pine root embedded in the rock, her body trembling from fear, exhaustion, and the terrible nearness of the man she had run from. Elias stood ahead of her, blocking her husband's steady approach with nothing more than his stance, as though he were part of the mountain itself, unmoving, unshakable. The air between the two men pulsed with something heavy and instinctive, the kind of silent violence that settles over a place moments before a storm tears it open. Her husband moved with a frightening surety, boots crunching against the icy stone as if he had every intention of walking straight through Elias. "You think you can protect her?" he said, voice low and almost amused, as though this were a conversation over supper rather than a confrontation on a death-drop ridge. "Men like you wander around pretending you're saviors. But you always break first." Elias didn't respond with a taunt or a threat. He simply shifted his weight, his body angled to shield Clara even more fully. When he spoke, his voice was calm. So calm it scared Clara more than any shouted warning could have. "This isn't a question of who breaks. It's a question of who deserves to walk out of this ridge alive." A gust of wind tore through the trees, cold enough to sting Clara's face, and her husband took that moment to advance another step. Elias held his ground. The two men weren't close enough to touch, but it felt like the air between them was tightening, compressing, becoming a fuse waiting for flame. Clara watched her husband's hand twitch near the inside of his coat, toward the knife she knew he always kept hidden there. Her stomach twisted. Before she could speak, Elias's hand rose, slow, deliberate, palm outward. "Don't," he said, and though the word was quiet, it carried down the ridge with the weight of a gunshot. Her husband's smile turned into a snarl, and he lunged forward, not with the hesitation of a man testing danger but with the certainty of someone who believed he could not lose. Clara choked on a gasp and reached out as if her hand alone could stop the impact. But Elias moved faster than she'd ever seen a human being move. Not wild. Not reckless. Controlled. Calculated. Mountain-born. The two men collided near the narrowest part of the ridge, boots scraping against ice-slick stone. Clara felt her whole heart stutter as her husband swung the knife in a wide arc, the blade glinting like a shard of moonlight. Elias deflected it with the back of his arm, the steel grazing his sleeve, and used the force of the lunge to pivot, driving her husband sideways, toward the edge. For one breathless second, Clara saw her husband's face twist with fury and shock as he realized the ground beneath him was gone. He windmilled for balance, boots skidding, and Elias grabbed his coat, not to save him but to decide what happened next. The moment stretched long enough for Clara to understand what she was seeing. Two futures suspended in the same heartbeat. "Let go of me," her husband spat. Elias didn't. Not yet. He leaned in, voice barely more than a cold whisper carried by the wind. "I said you wouldn't climb over me to reach her. And you won't." Then he released the coat. For an instant that seemed to stretch across the whole mountainside, Clara watched her husband hang in the freezing air, suspended between the world he ruled with cruelty and the drop that cared nothing for his name. His eyes widened, not with fear, but with disbelief, as if he'd never imagined a universe where someone dared to let him fall. Then gravity claimed him, ripping him from the ridge with brutal finality. He disappeared over the edge, swallowed by darkness and the jagged teeth of the ravine below. There was no scream, just the violent crash of body against stone, an echo that rolled upward like the mountain exhaling a long-held breath. Clara's hand flew to her mouth, her knees threatening to buckle beneath her. She felt no triumph, no satisfaction, only shock, deep, bone-shaking shock, and a hollow ache where years of fear had lived. Elias didn't watch the fall. He didn't track the sound. He simply stepped back from the edge, breathing hard, a thin line of blood trailing down his forearm where the knife had grazed him. The wind pushed at his coat, stirring loose pine needles around his boots, as if the mountain itself was reclaiming the silence. He turned toward Clara, his expression unreadable at first, carved from the same cold stone as the ridge beneath them. For a second, she wondered if he regretted what he'd done, or if he feared how she might look at him now. But when their eyes met, something in his face softened, the hardness easing like thawing ice. "Are you hurt?" he asked quietly. The question, so simple, so human, hit Clara harder than the fall had. She shook her head, though her voice refused to come. Elias closed the distance between them in 2 strides, lifting her gently from the ridge before her trembling legs could betray her. His hands were steady even as hers shook against his chest. She felt the warmth of him, the solidity, the safety she'd never known in any man's presence. "I didn't want you to see that," he murmured, guiding her away from the cliff, deeper into the shelter of the pines. "I didn't want to live through the things he would have done," she whispered back, surprising herself with the truth that spilled out. Elias's jaw clenched, an instinctive, protective reaction, but he didn't speak. Not yet. Instead, he helped her down the ridge, each step careful and deliberate, making sure she never slipped, never faltered. The forest slowly widened around them, the ground leveling beneath their feet as the danger faded behind them like a bad dream losing its grip. But Clara knew it wasn't over. Not really. Her husband was dead, but the town he ruled, the men who owed him favors, the law he poisoned, all of that still lived. Elias must have sensed her thoughts, because when they reached a small clearing bathed in dim silver light, he finally spoke again. "We're not going back," he said firmly. "Not tonight. Not tomorrow. Not ever." Clara looked up at him, voice barely a breath. "Then where do we go?" Elias glanced toward the dark stretch of trees leading deeper into the mountains. His world, not hers, and something resolute settled in his stance. "Home," he said, "to a place he never touched. A place he never earned the right to know." "You said." The mountains opened slowly as Elias led Clara deeper into the wilderness, the trees thinning just enough for moonlight to spill across the narrow path. Her legs burned, every muscle trembling from fear, cold, and the lingering shock of everything that had happened on the ridge. But Elias stayed beside her, never rushing, never letting her fall behind. His presence was quiet, steady, a warmth in the darkness she hadn't realized she was allowed to lean on. They walked until the forest softened around them, the harsh cliffs giving way to gentler slopes and a small valley tucked between two towering pines. A thread of smoke curled upward from a chimney, rising into the cold night like a fragile promise. The sight stopped Clara where she stood. A cabin, small, sturdy, built from thick logs with a porch worn smooth by years of weather. A warm amber glow pulsed through its window, flickering like a heartbeat in the quiet. Elias exhaled slowly, something like relief touching his features. "I built this place before the world turned me mean," he said quietly. "Didn't think I'd ever bring anyone here again." Clara's voice trembled. You had someone before." "Once," he said. "A long time ago. The mountains took her. And after that, I swore I'd live alone. Safer that way." Clara felt the truth of those words, the heaviness behind them, but he wasn't saying them to push her away. He was saying them so she'd understand what bringing her here meant. They climbed the porch steps together, the boards creaking beneath their weight. Elias pushed open the door, and warmth washed over her. Firelight dancing across wooden walls, a worn chair by the hearth, blankets folded with the kind of care only a solitary man gives to the few things he owns. Clara stepped inside slowly, her breath catching in her throat. The cabin wasn't much by any worldly measure. But after years of being owned, commanded, silenced, this small space felt like the first place she'd ever been allowed to exist. Elias closed the door behind them, shutting out the wind, the darkness, the danger left bleeding on the ridge. "You're safe now," he said softly, the words carrying more weight than any vow she'd ever heard. Clara sank onto the edge of the hearth, letting the fire thaw her trembling hands. "What happens tomorrow?" she whispered. Elias knelt beside her, the flames casting gold across his scarred face. "Tomorrow we start over," he said. "Whatever that looks like. Whatever pace you need. You're not running anymore. And no one is coming through that door unless we want them to." Her eyes filled, not with fear this time, but something painfully new. Hope. Fragile, trembling hope that felt almost too big for her chest. She looked at the man who had stood between her and death without asking for anything in return. "Thank you," she whispered. Elias shook his head. "Don't thank me yet. Just rest. Let the mountains do the rest of the healing." Clara leaned back against the warm stone of the fireplace, her eyes drifting shut, exhaustion finally catching her in gentle hands. And for the first time since the night she married a man who wanted to own her, she slept without fear. The mountains had taken a life that deserved to fall. Now, they were giving her a chance to rise.